In this video, we're going to be taking a look at a really cool text effect that you guys can use to help elevate your UI designs. In this case, I'm using this effect as part of an onboarding experience for a mobile app, but feel free to repurpose this however you see fit. So what I've created here is a really nice moment within my mobile app onboarding experience in which letters enter the screen, in this case they say welcome, then the user has the ability to shake the device itself to proceed to the next screen of the flow. Now I stopped right there after the shake, but if I were to design this entire app, the next screen might be a login page. If this is the first time the user was opening the app, again, completely up to you how you repurpose this interaction. I do think it's very versatile, and it has the potential to be a nice, delightful moment within the app experience. Full disclosure, we are going to be using a paid third-party plugin that I will link in the description below. It's called Newton. There are ways to do this for free, but it is way easier, in my opinion, to use this plugin. I'm not being paid to say this or anything. I just stumbled across this plugin while doing some client work, and I thought it was really awesome. And I think you guys will find it useful as well. Maybe sometime in the future, I'll create another video showing you guys how to do this for free. However, it would be a lot more of a convoluted, time-consuming process. But if that's something you guys are interested in, maybe you don't want to spend the money on this plugin, I'm more than happy to create another video. But for now, let's enjoy this tutorial. Hope you find it valuable. Let's dive in. All right, so here we are in Figma, and I've quickly storyboarded this nice little micro moment. So we have screen 1, where the letters sort of fall down, enter the viewport. In screen 2, they're going to settle at the bottom of the screen. There's going to be some indication to the user to shake the phone. And then in screen 3, once they shake the phone, the letters are going to shake and move out of view. Worth noting, we're going to be using After Effects text tools to create these, so we're not going to actually export these as separate letters. But what I am going to be exporting to After Effects are the shake phone text here and the status bar. Notice how the shake phone I just put inside of a frame so I could easily align it to the top of the view without having to use a reference image. Quick little hack, I'm just going to name this shake phone. So we're going to be exporting the shake phone and the status bar. I'm just going to export those at 2x. I'm going to put them on my desktop for now. And everything else we're going to do in After Effects. So let's head in After Effects. Let's create a new composition. I'm going to do this at 375 times 812, but at 2x, so that's what these numbers represent. That way, if I want to scale it down later without losing quality, I'm able to do that. I always like to work at 2x. So let's just call this shake. And we can take those assets, there we go, and just drag those into our assets panel. And if we want, we can create some folders by just dragging this composition to a folder, and we'll just call this comps. Or actually, let's add a little underscore so it appears at the top. That's what I like to do. And we'll take these and just create a folder and call these images. Cool, so let's take our status bar and let's just use the align tool as a center and top align it so it's right where it should be. And we'll also take the shake phone and we'll just right and top align it like so. I'm also going to add a background layer. So instead of exporting that as a PNG, I'm just going to do this part in After Effects. So this blue 452AEA, we can just copy that hex code. I'm going to hit Command Y to add a new solid. We'll just call this BG for background, and I already done this, so it's right there. But if you needed to add your hex code, you would just put it in right there. Hit OK. I'm going to move that to the bottom, and we'll just lock this because we're not going to really mess with it. Now let's add our text. So to do that, I'm just going to hit Command T to bring up our text tool. You could also just click up here on the text tool. And I'm going to add our first letter, which is W. And the font we're using is going to be Barlow Condensed Semi-Bold. Now in Figma, the font size was 300, but we're working at 2x, so make sure the font size is at 600. And we're just going to basically repeat, so copy and paste each of these letters. So we can just rename this E. It's kind of tedious, but you just come in and replace all the text like so. And I'll speed this up, but we'll be back when we have all of our letters. So here we have all of our letters, and right now, it doesn't really matter like what the layout of these letters is because we're going to be using a plugin to affect the layout anyway. I just wanted to make it somewhat legible that we can spell out the word welcome. Now, what I'm going to do is take all these letters, select them all, and I'm going to right click on all these and pre-compose. This is going to bring them all into their own composition. Just make sure this radio button is selected. Move all attributes into a new composition. I'm going to call this letters. And let's double click into this composition. I'm going to select all these letters. let's head into composition. Let's hit Newton 3. That's the plugin we're going to be using, and I'll link it in the description. And here is the interface of Newton. So it's its own independent interface, different than After Effects, but it sits within After Effects. And here we have some parameters. We have our gravity controls, we have our layers, and then we have our play options. So when I just hit play, notice that these letters are just falling out of screen, and that's due to the gravity parameters. If I were to increase the magnitude, they will fall faster. That's basically increasing gravity. Another thing we can do is change the direction in which they fall. But for this, we want them to be falling straight down, so I'm just going to reset both of these. We can just hit this little icon here to reset to default. And we want these to fall from out of view and settle at the bottom. So if I just drag these letters up to the top of the screen and hit play, that's sort of what we want, but then they don't stop, right? How do we get them to stop? There are some controls within Newton, like this button down here, which is an infinite, what does it say? Infinite ground. So if I hit play, this is sort of what we want. Notice how the letters stop at the ground, but the problem is the letters will fall out of view. And notice how they're falling very naturally, just according to how they would if they were physical objects, which is really awesome. This is the benefit of using this plugin versus having to manually key all of these letter positions. That would take forever. You'd have to be like Disney level animator to be able to accomplish that. I'm not that good, but that's sort of what we want. They also have this option to contain these elements, but the problem is these are falling out of view, so that's not going to help us. You know, that would sort of work if these were inside the container at first. That's sort of what we want. This is like the end state, but we want the start state to be out of view. So how do we do this? Well, we can first exit Newton. What I'm going to do is actually add a shape layer to use as our container. So I'm going to double click the rectangle tool. That's going to create a rectangle that's the exact size of this rectangle. I just got rid of the fill by going to fill options here and just uncheck the fill. And I'm going to add a stroke, just a 1 pixel stroke that's the same color as our main composition, which is our blue color. And what I'm going to do with the shape layer, I'm just going to hit enter, rename it container. And I'm going to twizzle down the rectangle tool. I'm going to right click on the rectangle path, and I'm going to convert to Bezier path. Now what we want to do is delete this edge of the rectangle, but everything else is going to remain just a 1 pixel stroke. But we want to delete this top part. So I'm going to right click. I'm going to go over to mask and shape path. I'm going to click this close. So right now it's checked closed. We want to uncheck that. And now we have this path opened right here, but it's contained around. So now what we can do is select all these layers, head back into Newton, and now when we move all of these letters off screen, whoops, just the letters, zoom out here and hit play. Oops, what happened? Oh, so the problem is, right, nothing's going to happen yet because what I have to do is come over to container. Right now, the type is dynamic. We want to change this to static. I'm not going to get too in the weeds with what all these mean, but static basically just means that this is going to stay in place and it's going to act as a container. Whereas the letters, they're just going to continue falling into infinity, but because they're running to this container, that's going to happen. And that is pretty much the effect we want. But what we can do now is just kind of play with the letter position and play with some of these parameters just to get the layout exactly where we want. So this could take some trial and error. You just kind of have to feel it out. So just like move these around ever so slightly. You can stack them a little differently, like so. See, that one is too far over. So basically just play around until you get a composition that you like. And if you want, you can play with some of the gravity controls. Maybe you think this is falling too slowly, so you could change the magnitude to something like 25-ish. You can also mess with some of the parameters like bounciness. So maybe let's see what happens if we just bump this up ever so slightly. You got to be careful with this one because it might make After Effects go a little crazy. But yeah, it just makes them a little more bouncy, a little more like reactive. You can change things like the density, which basically just makes them heavier. Now in this instance, I don't think density will actually do anything. But yeah, feel free to play around with these until you just get your end state exactly how you wanted it. So that's a little too bouncy for me. Maybe let's take that to 0.6, just a little bit more. And yeah, you could spend all day doing this, but I guess for the sake of this tutorial, I'll pick something and then I'll just cut to a place where I feel it's good.
3 hours later.
So I played around with the position of these layers and some of these parameters until I got something that looked good to me for what I'm going for. Again, you can spend as much time as you want with this. But yeah, I'm liking the way this is looking. It's looking pretty similar to my original composition in Figma. What we can do now is actually render this movement as a video. So we can actually just change this end frame to something like 100. We don't need that many frames to render. But let's just go ahead and render this. So now we have a video clip of that movement and it just exported to its own composition called letters 2. I'm just gonna call this letters drop in. And we can bring this into our main composition that we called shake. And we'll just put it here and we can actually just get rid of the original letters. So now we have just a video of these letters dropping into our screen. Now, one thing I want to do is fade the shake phone in after these letters fall into place. So that's not going to be there initially. So I'll have it fade in probably around the 4-second mark. So let's just take the shake phone PNG here. Let's hit T on our keyboard to open up the opacity properties. Let's keyframe opacity and then just move over like 20 frames or so. Add another keyframe, and then let's just make sure it fades in. So drop the opacity down to 0 at that keyframe. And maybe not that long, somewhere around there. So it's gonna do this. So now the user knows to shake the phone to continue. Now we're gonna actually do the interaction where the user shakes the phone and the letters are gonna drop out of the screen. So to do this, let's go back into our letters drop-in composition. And what I'm gonna do is copy all of these layers. So Command C. I'm actually gonna open up a new composition and we're gonna call this letters shake. And I'm gonna paste them into here. Now notice, because we use Newton automatically keyed all of this physics data here, but I'm gonna hit U on my keyboard with all of these layers selected. I'm just gonna go ahead and delete all of this keyframe data. But let's make sure the playhead's at the end. And let's just delete all of these. So now we have, for the shake interaction, the letters are gonna start at the exact same position as where they ended in the drop interaction. So now what we're gonna do is pretty much what we did before using Newton, but what we wanna do now, since the letters have dropped into the screen, I actually wanna flip around this shape layer, this container layer, so that this edge is facing the top, so that when the user shakes it, they actually can drop out of the bottom, but they're contained within the top. So what I'm gonna do is just select this container layer, hit R, and rotate it 180 degrees. So now this edge is containing these layers, but they can drop out of the bottom. So let's select all these layers once more. Let's go into composition. Let's open up Newton. And now this time, we're gonna simulate the user shaking the phone, but at this stage, we can't actually shake the composition itself. So you just have to imagine the user shaking the phone. This is just what's gonna show on the actual screen. So when I hit play now, notice how they can drop out of the bottom. Again though, let's make sure that this container is set to static. And now what we can do is just to simulate the shake interaction, maybe we can change the magnitude and the direction of the gravity within this scene here, so that it looks something like this. Now we want to simulate a user shaking these letters, right? So maybe we want to make these go a little crazy. So with these letters selected, let's increase the bounciness to maybe like 1. Let's see what that looks like. Maybe a little more. See how they're going crazy and they're like contained within the top now because we flip this around? That's a little too crazy. It's kind of spazzing out. So again, just sort of play with the parameters until you get something that looks kind of realistic. That obviously doesn't take too long like that. So again, I'm gonna just play around with this and we'll be back when that's done.
2,000 years later.
All right, so again, I played with some of these parameters and I got something that I'm satisfied with. So it looks something like this. It's a nice realistic shake effect here. If you could imagine the actual device itself being shaken. So I'm gonna just decrease this end frame and render this out as a video clip. And let's rename this letters exit. And I'm gonna head back to my main composition, which is called shake. I'm actually just gonna rename this one main. That'll be easier. I actually have some other ones that I was playing around with. Let's just get rid of these. Really quickly, just stay organized. Let's bring all of our comps into our comp folder. So we're organized. And now let's take that new letters exit composition, bring them back into our main comp. And we'll just bring it over. So the letters are gonna, just from the top now, the letters are gonna drop in. The shake the phone text is gonna fade in, and then we're gonna exit. But there's gonna be a little pause here. And I think I want that to pause a little longer. So one thing I'm gonna do is just drag this over and we'll fill in this little gap here with a freeze frame. So I'm going to take this first drop in clip. I'm gonna hit Command D to duplicate. And then I'm just gonna move the playhead over here. I'm gonna right click, I'm gonna head over to time, freeze frame. And I'll just extend it to fill in the gap like so. So now there's a little bit of a pause. And the letters will exit the screen. So once they exit, I'm just gonna fade this out, the shake phone. So I'm actually gonna take both these keyframes. I'm going to hit Control C, Control V. I'm gonna right click on these keyframes and just do keyframe assisted time reverse keyframe. So this will actually fade them out. So before it faded in, then it'll fade out. So awesome, there is the interaction. But we can go a step further and actually put this into its own composition and simulate someone actually shaking the device itself. So I'll show you how to do that now. So let's create a new composition. This is gonna be our final render. And we'll just call this final render. And we'll make this 1920 by 1080. And we'll just bring this into our comps folder. Now this is the composition that's actually gonna contain the device as well as the UI. And we're gonna actually simulate someone shaking the device itself just to really sell this effect. So to do that, we actually need a device mockup that we can put our UI inside of. And I like to just create really minimal ones. I'll show you how to do that right here in Figma so you don't have to go search for them. I think they look better for something like this anyway. What we're gonna do is just draw out a rectangle that's the same size of these compositions. So we'll do 375 times 812. I'll just type it in, 375 times 812. And what we're gonna do is add a stroke. We'll make sure it's on the outside. And we'll just give it like an 8 pixel stroke or something like that. And we'll make the stroke white because this is gonna be sitting on black. And then I'll just give this a radius, maybe like 32. So it starts looking like a device. We'll call this one device. And then what we can do is just duplicate this right here. And we can get rid of the stroke on this one. So this one is just gonna be the mask. It's gonna be the screen mask. Whoops. And we could just make this like a different color, maybe like this. Doesn't really matter. And we can actually get rid of the fill. Or actually we can make the fill white here. So we have our device and our device mask. I'm gonna export these to my desktop. And back in After Effects, we can take those assets, bring them into our image folder here. So let's drop in our device, and this is actually too big. Let's scale it down 50% by hitting S on my keyboard, changing it to 50. Let's align it to the center of the comp. And then let's do the same thing with the mask. Align center, and let's scale it down 50%. So now we have our device and our device mask in this composition. What we want to do is grab our main composition and drop that in here. And again, let's scale it down 50%, it's too big. And let's actually just position the main comp right in between the device and mask. And what we want to do is actually mask out the composition. So what we need to do is right click, make sure our modes column is visible. And we're going to use an alpha matte mask. So now that mask has masked out our composition. And it's going to sit right within our device. Very cool. So now what we can do is select all these layers and pre-compose them. And let's just call this phone. And what I'm going to do is select this little star icon. That way we're not dealing with the entire composition width. It's just going to be the width of the phone. Now what we want to do is find exactly where the shake takes place. So right around here, I'm going to select that layer, hit Command-Shift-D to cut it, and then find the end of the shake and cut it again, Command-Shift-D. So now this middle layer is where we want to actually apply an effect called wiggle. And I'm just going to use the wiggle position. There's a bunch of different wiggles, but I find the position works well for this. And now watch what happens. When I play through, once the user shakes the phone, the device is going to start shaking. Now we can change some parameters to make this look a little more realistic. So maybe we want to make the wiggle speed a little faster, so it actually looks like a shake. And that was looking pretty good. I think one thing I want to do though is just towards the very end, or at the very beginning and the very end, I'm going to keyframe this wiggle amount. So let's twizzle this down. Let's go to the effect controls. Let's go to wiggle position, and we're going to change the wiggle amount. We're going to keyframe this. It's going to start at 0. So let's change the wiggle amount to 0. And then around here, it's going to speed up to maybe 50 like before. And then it's going to slowly fade out. So I'm just going to copy and paste that 50 right there. And I'm going to slowly fade it out to 0 again. And there we go. What I want to do just before wrapping this up, I want to add some motion blur. So what I'm going to do is just select all these layers. You want to make sure that your global motion blur here is enabled, and then also enable it at the layer level. And that's just going to make this look a little more realistic. Gotta love After Effects motion blur. There we go. And I think I'm also going to change the color of this background. I don't like the black, so let's just double click on the rectangle tool. I'll just make it the same color, that same blue. I think that'll look nice, like so. And we'll just call this BG. And let's take our range here, and we can just render the first 9 seconds. I'm going to render this through the media encoder queue. So if you go to File, Export, Add to Media Encoder Queue, we can just render this, and I'll save this to my desktop. So let's click on that guy. Let's go to desktop, and we'll just call this Final Render. And this should take a few seconds to render. And let's just click to view it. Here's our final render. And there we go. That is it. Now, of course, there would be additional UI elements. I just showed the very first part of that onboarding flow. But there we go, guys. Hopefully this was helpful. I know there was a lot of stuff going on here, but just trying to teach you how to add some little delightful moments to your UI. Now, if you actually wanted to export this into a dev environment, you can use something like the body moving plugin to export this as a JSON file. Now, there are plenty of videos on YouTube on how to do this, so I'm not going to get into it here. But I'm sure some of you guys, if you're developers especially, might be wondering, how do you actually bring this into a dev environment? That would be one way. You could probably also use a background video or a GIF. I mean, the file size is probably going to be small enough. But yeah, for those wondering how do you actually bring this into code, it's definitely doable. But yeah, that's been it, guys. If you guys enjoyed this, I'd really appreciate it if you liked, commented, shared, all that jazz. Let me know what you think, and I will talk to you guys in the next one. Thanks so much for watching.